Across 2017, JTIC's terrorism events database recorded almost 23,000 attacks worldwide, which resulted in more than 18,000 non-militant fatalities. In comparison to 2016, this represented a slight decrease in attacks, but a more than 1/3 decrease in fatalities. This trend was largely driven by militant operational patterns in countries already experiencing high levels of non-state violence. For instance, in the 10 most violent countries by number of attacks, attacks fell in 6 of them, and the number of fatalities fell in 8 of them. The most attacks worldwide were recorded in Syria, which experienced more than 8,000 attacks. This accounted for over 1/3 of all attacks recorded worldwide, and accounted for as many attacks as the next 5 most violent countries. However, non-militant fatalities in Syria fell by almost half, which was largely a consequence of an increasing incidence of violence between non-state armed groups, and in particular the heavy fighting between the Islamic State and the Syrian Democratic Forces for control of the city of Raqqa. Iraq remained the 3rd most violent country worldwide, although the number of attacks fell by 1/3, and non-militant fatalities fell by almost 3/5. It's worth bearing in mind that while this was largely attributable to the large extent of territorial pressure brought to bear on the Islamic State and the losses it suffered through this period, Baghdad also suppressed casualty figures for security forces during the long-running and intense battle for control of the city of Mosul. For the 4th consecutive year, the Islamic State was the most active non-state armed group worldwide in terms of both attacks and fatalities. Its operational tempo increased slightly from 2016, conducting more than 4,500 attacks, although the number of fatalities it caused dropped by more than 2/5, down to 6,500. This reflected the steady territorial losses suffered by the group across the course of the year. In particular, in Iraq and Syria, the group lost control of Mosul and its de facto capital Raqqa, before losing all territory in these countries by early November. As the Islamic State transitioned to asymmetric insurgent operations in areas recently recaptured by either the state or rival non-state armed groups, its operational tempo increased, conducting larger amounts of lower-level attacks, while its capacity to conduct more punitive mass casualty attacks became more constrained.
Worldwide, the most commonly used tactic was the use of standoff/area attack, which typically involved the use of explosives or indirect fire weaponry. Although the use of this tactic decreased from 2016, the tactic was still used in more than 1/3 of all attacks. The security forces continue to be the most targeted sector for non-state armed groups. The intensification of intergroup fighting, especially in Syria and to a lesser extent in Afghanistan, was underlined by a 3/4 increase in attacks targeting rival non-state armed groups. More than 20,000 counter-terrorism operations were recorded in 2017. This was an increase of 1/3 in comparison to the preceding year in 2016. These operations resulted in 19,000 militant fatalities, although this was a decrease of 10% from 2016. The number of civilian fatalities recorded during operations more than halved in 2016 and were down to almost 2,500. A major contributor to this decrease was a reduced number of Syrian and Russian airstrikes in opposition-held areas in Syria in 2017. Airstrikes by the two states decreased by almost half in 2016, and the resultant number of civilian fatalities decreased by almost 3/4.